Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share true Skinwalker horror stories. First story. I'm a security guard at Skinwalker Ranch. I almost died during my first shift. The dark room was filled with the whirring sounds of hard drives and the pale blue glow of computer monitors. An occasional burst of static from one of the walkie-talkies at the charging station would break the silence between me and the other security guard, who was trying unsuccessfully to keep his eyes open. Doesn't anything interesting ever happen around here? I asked Peter, my new supervisor. I figured most of the rumors were bogus, but isn't anything about this place real? Skinwalkers? Glowing orbs? You gotta have a few stories at least. He had his feet up on the desk in the security office and several dozen monitors showing different camera angles of the property were arranged before us. The billionaire who owned the ranch had spared no expense trying to capture the paranormal presences of Skinwalker Ranch on camera, but so far from what I understood, he had been completely unsuccessful. "You watched one too many History Channel specials, kid," he said, barely opening his eyes to look at me. I realized he was falling asleep. "There's nothing here but a rich guy with too much cash and an army of underpaid acolytes like you and me, busting our asses to document a whole lot of nothing. So what's with the body armor? And the tasers and all the safety equipment? I'm surprised they don't have us packing heat with all this stuff we have strapped to us. We look like SWAT officers." Which was completely ridiculous considering our job descriptions mostly involved eating box lunches and trying not to bore ourselves to death. "Dude, shut up and quit asking so many questions. One day the old man will get wise that E.T. ain't coming. But until then, just enjoy the gravy train, okay?" I grunted in agreement and sat watching the monitors as Peter began to snore. Looking at the time, I saw it was past 3 a.m. Only another 4 hours until the morning shift arrived. But this was the hardest time of night to stay awake. I needed another cup of coffee or I would soon be asleep like Peter, and at least one of us had to keep an eye out for the boss. There was no way of knowing when the old eccentric billionaire would come wandering over for a look at the video feeds, and to make sure his hired goons were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. He'd been known to pop in for surprise visits. Since I needed the job and couldn't afford to lose it, I decided a fresh cup of coffee was in order. I snuck out of the security office and went into the adjoining room where a single-serve coffee machine was plugged in on a counter beside a mini fridge. Yawning, I stuck a pot in and snapped the mechanism closed, pressing the button for a large coffee. The machine began to chug and click and gurgle before spitting out some hot, steaming black brew. Taking the cup with me back into the security office, I was unsurprised to find Peter still snoring. I blew on my coffee and sat back down, looking at the monitors with forced open eyes. Something caught my attention on the monitor to my right. The barn door was swinging open, slapping against the adjoining wall in the strong wind. It wasn't open before. "Peter, wake up. Why is the barn door open?" I had to shake him a few times and ask him the question again, but eventually he blinked his eyes open long enough to peer at the monitor. "Bossman's probably out there polishing the ATVs or something. Why do you care? If there was a perimeter breach, it would have set off an alarm. Cleaning the four-wheelers at 3 a.m.? Why would he do that?" Peter opened his eyes up all the way. "Yeah, you're right. It could be a test. He likes to do that sometimes to make sure we're not sleeping on the job. You go out there, newbie. I'll stay here and watch the feeds." He put his helmet over his eyes, and I could hear him resume, snoring a moment later. If it was the boss out there, I wasn't going to cover for Peter, I thought to myself. This guy was useless. It seemed like he didn't know the first thing about property protection or security procedures. I was worried if something really did happen, he'd be useless or would do more harm than good in a crisis. But luckily we were on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. Besides, nothing bad ever happened at Skinwalker Ranch, despite its reputation. Or so I thought. As I made my way out through the hallways of the farmhouse, which had been converted into a makeshift security compound, I found myself feeling nervous. Something about this wasn't right. The idea that the boss was out in the barn at 3 a.m., testing our preparedness, didn't jive with me. But I suppose it was possible. Stepping out into the cool night air, I looked across the driveway at the barn, not more than 100 yards away. The noise of the untethered door banging against the wood could be heard loudly now, and sounded to my ears like an omen of evil. A fat orange moon hung low in the sky, its awful gravity pulling me towards the blood-red building. I found myself standing before the open door, the smell of hay wafting out from inside. Close the door and go back to the security office, I thought suddenly. Whatever you do, don't step foot inside that barn. It's cursed. It's evil. Stay out. A voice started murmuring from the shadows inside, as if in agreement. It sounded like a man, but their tones were hushed and quiet, difficult to understand. Who's in there? I called out, taking my flashlight from my belt and shining it into the barn. No one answered, and the mumbling, chanting voice continued. "Peter, come in," I said into the radio. But as soon as the words escaped my lips, the walkie-talkie made a painful, high-pitched squeal of feedback, then clicked loudly and was dead. "Hello," I said again into the useless device. There was no response, and I had no way of knowing if he'd heard me or not. It's probably just the boss trying to catch us slacking off, I thought to myself, considering what Peter had said earlier. I would simply go inside and turn on the light. Then the rich owner would give me a pat on the back for my prompt action and response to the practice scenario. With that thought firmly in mind, I entered the barn, my heart pounding. My body knew what my mind had not yet realized, that I was in terrible danger. When I got inside the barn, the huge wooden door slammed shut behind me, and I knew I was in trouble. The murmuring, chanting thing in the darkness continued its deliberate cadence as I turned and tried to get out, clawing at the door and trying desperately to pull it open. One of my fingernails broke off and began to bleed, but I didn't notice that until later, as the adrenaline was pumping through my veins. A moment later, the door itself disappeared. Its edges dissolved into the surrounding wood, and I backed away from it, terrified, looking up at where it had been a moment before. Such a thing was impossible, and yet it had just happened before my eyes. I was trapped. Spinning around, I saw the thing in the shadows, still chanting and now swaying back and forth. Its silhouette in the darkness reminded me of a shaman mixed with a wolf man, holding a wand or a scepter of some kind. The head of the scepter rattled and made awful, fleshy sounds like teeth being shook in a sack made of skin. I tried not to listen to the things the creature was saying, as the words felt like worms crawling through my ears and into my gray matter, invading my thoughts. It was like an itch that I couldn't scratch, like a dozen black flies crawling on my brain where I couldn't get to them with my fingers, taking occasional bites and sampling the local cuisine inside my skull. "Get out of my head!" I heard myself scream, but the wicked chanting continued. The language was ancient and unknowable. Clutching my skull, that horrible, itching sensation of something worming its way into my mind continued, undeterred by my protests. I looked around and saw other dark forms were in the barn with me. They looked like shadows at first, moving along the ground like dark puddles spreading outwards from a surrounding oil spill. But then the things began to take shape and rise up, shedding their two-dimensional forms and turning into humanoid beings with pitch-black features. The shadow creatures moved slowly and deliberately, their mouths yawning open as they approached me with curious faces. Their features were black holes within their dark forms. They reached out towards me as the chanting thing in the corner raised up its hands like a preacher in a demonic prayer service, its voice rising higher and higher in volume. Red-painted walls all around me began to drip and bleed, revealing ancient, druidic symbols which were carved deep into the wood underneath. Suddenly, the entire barn felt like a living thing, as if I was inside the belly of some great, horrible beast, which was inhaling and exhaling all around me. It was hot in the barn and humid despite the chill of the night air outside. The temperature was rising quickly, causing sweat to pour from my brow, running into my eyes and making them sting with pain as the shadow creatures started to inspect me more closely. Each one took its turn leaning in close, running its oily hands over me and judging me somehow. They made whispering noises back and forth, and a few took sample bites of me with shadowy mouths, leaving oddly non-bleeding wounds in my flesh. I cried out in pain each time, and it seemed like they were shushing me as they raised up their extremities to my face with every noise I made. For some reason, I found myself obliging. Finally, one of them seemed to settle on taking me for themselves, as the chatter between the shadow creatures stopped, and it smiled broadly, looking pleased with itself. The creature resembled a black panther about to pounce as it leaned in towards me. It looked as if it was preparing to dive into my mouth to make a home inside my body permanently, when the huge wooden barn door, which had previously vanished, crashed in behind me. Glaring spotlights filled the space, and I looked around to see the shadow things were dispersing. The shaman creature in the corner, who had been chanting in wicked tones, made a circular motion with his wand, and a dark hole appeared in the wall, which he proceeded to exit through. It disappeared a second later, closing tightly behind him. Looking around, I saw the barn around me was no longer painted bright red. It was old and run down, dilapidated and out of use. The ceiling was broken and sagging, revealing stars through a gaping hole up above. "What the hell are you doing in here, kid?" one of the security guards was asking me. "You're not supposed to be in here. Nobody's allowed in this building. It's not safe." But Peter told me to go check it out. He was sleeping. I never told you to go in here. I haven't even seen you since you disappeared earlier," said Peter, stepping out from behind the other guard. "You're lucky these guys came to check in here after hearing you screaming. This building is off limits. Can't you see it's ready to fall down any second? But I was with you just 10 minutes ago. You said dash. Don't put words in my mouth, kid. And don't make up stories. I didn't tell you to do anything. I turned around and you were gone. I figured you went home, to be honest. Thought maybe this job wasn't for you." I stuttered, unsure what to say or how to respond to this. I was sure Peter had told me to go out to the barn to check it out. Was I remembering it wrong? Was I really that tired? Or had I been spending my shift with an imposter? How was I supposed to know what was true? "Looks like we might have a 278, said one of the guards nervously. "The Skinwalkers are back." "Don't talk about them," snapped the supervisor. "You know the rules. You talk about them, and that's when they show up. Everybody get inside now. Buddy protocols. You need to go to the bathroom. Take your buddy with you. You know the rules, Peter. We got a code black by the sounds of it." Everyone drew their weapons, and I saw these other guards had guns with odd, futuristic attachments on the barrels, strange, translucent white pieces that looked like oversized silencers. I hadn't seen any of these people when I arrived for the first half of my training shift. It turned out they lived on the property and were paid handsomely to be on call to respond to any events as they occurred. You guys gotta be kidding. Skinwalkers? Really, my supervisor asked as we hustled inside. Peter looked unimpressed by all that was happening, and I realized that he didn't believe in anything supernatural. He was a die-hard skeptic of such things. Guys, come on, he said dryly. This is complete paranoia. The kid just had a panic attack or something. You don't really believe in this stuff, do you? Quiet. One of the heavily armored guards snarled at him. You don't know shit about what happens in this place. You've only been here a month. The boss should have known better than to let you train the new guy. He could have gotten himself killed. I felt queasy and numb all over when he said that, realizing it was true. If they hadn't arrived when they did, who knew what might have happened? Peter didn't say another word. Instead, he just made an annoyed sound and followed the rest of us as the formation began moving towards the door to the farmhouse. He stayed back a little ways, as if in protest. Just as we were about to enter the house, I heard him stop from a few yards away, muttering to himself. I paused to look back, stopping where I was in the doorway as the rest of the team went inside. I held the door open for him, hoping he would follow, but instead he began to yell in a loud, agitated voice. You're all a bunch of suckers. You know that? Skinwalkers? Really? This place is just a busted-down old ranch in the middle of nowhere. There's no curse. There's no monsters. Watch. He turned around, facing the other direction. Oh, Skinwalkers, come and get me. Look, fresh meat for you Skinwalkers. What? Aren't you hungry? Looking back at us, he smiled, then started laughing mockingly at all of us. See? There's nothing out here. He made a surprised sound and turned suddenly, just as something began to appear from the shadows. It was large and hulking, its form an ink blot against a starless midnight sky. The sound it made was a deep growl, like a territorial wolf, only much, much larger. Its legs were long and stilted, giving it an unnatural look. Its fur was bare in places, mangy and full of clumps and burrs. Nice doggy, Peter said, backing away, his hands extended outward defensively. That's not a dog. Get inside the damn house. Now, screamed a voice from over my shoulder, deafening me. Several other dark shapes emerged from the periphery of my vision, crowding around Peter and surrounding him. He began to run, but it was too late. They leapt at him, knocking him to the ground with a brutal impact. It looked like a highlight football tackle, his upper body being sent one direction. Then his legs were slammed into from the opposite angle, causing his body to contort and bend in two different ways. When he landed, he looked unable to breathe or speak, and I wondered if the wind had been knocked out of him, or if they'd broken his spine. I instinctively began to run towards him, thinking I could save him, but one of the nearby guards grabbed my arm and pulled me back. If not for that, I'd probably be dead. Squad, firing positions, the guy in charge of the group yelled, and they all fell into formation. Meanwhile, the demon wolves were tearing Peter to pieces. One of them had its jaws around his face and was squeezing like a vice grip on his skull. The other one was shredding his torso with its teeth. Ready, aim, fire. The group of pseudo-soldiers around me started unleashing semi-automatic rifle rounds into the hellhounds, each one tracing a green trajectory which streaked across the sky like tracer bullets. There was no immediate reaction from the beasts at first, and I thought they were making no impact, but then the dog-like creatures started snapping and wincing at the bullets as they were grazed by them. Don't let up. Keep the pressure on. Instead of retreating, the shadow creatures snarled and began to stalk towards the group of us. The bullets were doing little to stop their advance, as if they were being sprayed with water pistols. It merely seemed to annoy them further. One leapt suddenly with lightning-quick speed, pouncing on a guard nearby. He screamed as the thing started shredding his Kevlar, cutting through the protective gear like warm butter with its claws. Peter was no longer moving or breathing, and the remaining guards were quickly losing their courage. "Fall back!" the leader of them shouted, and I hustled inside, this time not even hesitating. We slammed the door shut and listened to the screams of the guards who didn't make it back inside. The creatures didn't kill them quickly, though. Those who were left alive died slowly, as the hellish wolves tortured them, making them scream for help in an attempt to draw us back outside to rescue them. After a while, I plugged my ears, unable to stand the sounds of their dying screams one moment longer. They didn't stop until the sun came up, and by then the creatures were gone. You'd think there would be some evidence, that one of the surveillance systems would have caught something, but the cameras showed nothing. The next day, I saw the tapes myself. They showed nothing but a peaceful farm until about 3:30 a.m., when all of them went dead at the same exact instant. Authorities investigated the incident, and I gave a statement about what I'd seen, at least as accurate of a statement as I could under the circumstances. The whole thing was written off as a wild animal attack, and once the dust settled, the whole team was let go, fired for our inaction during the event. Not that I ever wanted to go back there again anyways. I'll never forget what happened that day and what the guards said about them showing up when you talk about them. So be careful if you hear this read aloud, because they just might have heard you speak their name, and they always show up when you talk about them. You just might not notice. Second story. I think my dog is a skinwalker. I've been seeing a lot of skinwalker stories on this app lately that goes along with videos on my TikTok. I did not really understand what a skinwalker was even until I looked it up. When I got chills down my back. That topic will always be the one thing that creeps me out the most till this day. And what is the worst part is I think I'm living with one right now. For the people that don't know what a skinwalker is, here is the definition. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. The term is never used for healers. Now these does see, like something from an urban legend or a creepypasta, and it is so likely that it is, but I believe it's real from the evidence that I'm about to tell you in a sec. Now, if you look up Skinwalker, it's going to show you a creature with a moose-looking head and a human body. Now, that is just the creepypasta version that does not creep me out. What does creep me out is like the dogs, deers, and animals that are skinwalkers. I hope you can find some pics of those, cause they are scary AF. Now to the point. I got my German Shepherd, Mina, a while back. She was a stray dog who was badly hurt, so my parents brought her in. I fell in love right away. She's the best dog ever. But there are some things you should know about her. Mina is like really smart, like NGL. She once opened my door, which I know a lot of dogs can do that, but listen to this. We have an older dog, Misty, and if we have to give her medicine from like the vet, we just wrap it in cheese, and she doesn't even notice the pill is in there. Now Mina instantly knows she will not eat that pill. One time we crushed it up in her food until it was almost unseeable. Still, she would not eat it. Now, this is not foolproof, cause German Shepherds have a really good sense of smell, but listen to this. This is where the story gets scary. I was sitting on my couch watching horror movies, falling asleep. I could barely keep my eyes open. I was almost asleep when I heard a door open and shut. My eyes slightly opened to see a figure walking stumbly and slowly towards me. I thought it was just my mom, or I was imagining things cause I was almost asleep. Now this part of the story does not even seem real. I still wonder to this day if it was real. As the figure got closer, instantly recognized it. It was Mina. I swear to God, Mina was on her back legs walking towards me. My heart started to race. I told myself I was just dreaming. Now Mina did not do anything but stare at me. Then her eyes started to grow a bright red as her form changed from dog to just a shadow, then back to Mina. Then she walked away. The next morning I woke up and told my mom about everything. OFC, she did not believe me, and you probably do not either. Even though it doesn't seem real, I swear it was. Now, if you ever talk about skinwalkers to me, I will leave the room. Sometimes out of nowhere, the images of Mina's glowing red come back to me, and I've never let Mina in my room or around me since. Third story. Skinwalkers need friends too. Northern Canada would get so cold in the winter that it was almost impossible for cars to function. So, my family became very skilled hunters. We would have a hearty meal of deer or rabbit every night, and we learned to grow vegetables indoors for a little bit of freshness in our Viking-like diet. I was around 15 when I first started to hunt alone, and I was 18 when this happened. It was early in the morning, and I was tracking rabbits. I had found a nice spot near a rabbit den and bundled up, gun raised, ready to shoot. Something fell off, though. It took a minute before I realized the forest was dead quiet. No chickadees, no coyotes howling, no wind. Nothing. It was as if all the creatures in the wild disappeared. As weird as it was, I paid no mind to it and chalked it up to being too cold for animals to be out and about, though that didn't explain the lack of wind and no leaves rustling. I lay in the snow for another 16 minutes before giving up and deciding to set off a different location. Just as I slung my gun over my shoulder, I glanced to the side and froze. A large black dog stood around 10 feet away from me. The dog had on a collar, so I assumed it was tamed. But the nearest house was an hour away, and it made no sense that a dog would be out here. "Are you lost, boy?" I asked casually, not at the time taking into account how wrong it was for a dog to be all the way out here. "Is your owner here?" The dog just stared. Its eyes were milky, and I felt as if they were boring into my skull. I approached the dog and held my hand out for it to sniff it. The dog didn't move, it didn't flinch, and its tail didn't wag. I drew my hand back and rummaged through my coat pocket. I pulled out a piece of deer jerky my father had steamed during the week. I snapped it in half and offered the piece to the dog. It took the piece in its teeth before swallowing it whole. I laughed nervously as the dog licked its chaps. "Hungry, huh? What are you doing out here?" I knelt down and stroked the dog's head. Its coat was freezing, like the dog had frostbite or fell in a river, but somehow wasn't wet. Its milky white eyes stared into me still. At the time I assumed it was cataracts. A bark came from the left of me, and both me and the dog turned to look. An entire pack of dogs stood in the clearing, all with milky white eyes and black fur. Chills ran down my spine, but still, being a stupid teenager, I just thought it was just a trait of that breed. The dog looked back at me and licked my hand with a tongue that felt like ice before running over to the group. I watched as the pack moved on. The largest dog's eyes lingered on me before following the others. I watched as they ran off out of the clearing. It was like a reset mode as soon as they left because the forest came back to life. I could hear chickadees, the rustle of wind through leaves, and the scattering of nearby rabbits and shrews. I shot 3 rabbits and headed home, still curious about the dogs. A week later, I asked Dad about it, but he said that the neighbor's dog, Sombra, had been missing for months, and everyone else either didn't have a dog that matched my description or just didn't have a dog in general. I thought that was very unnerving and didn't hunt for a while after that. The next time I saw the dog, it was early spring. I didn't have school to attend until the fall, so I just helped out at home and read and raised chickens. One Monday, both my parents were in Calgary visiting friends, and my brother was sick downstairs watching Game of Thrones, so I was pretty much alone. I sat in the library, reading and sipping some sweet Earl Grey tea. The rain was in a full-out downpour, so the chores I could carry out were mainly indoors and quick to complete. Scratching came at the door, causing the hair on my neck to stand up. We didn't own any animals that could scratch. Scared and curious, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and opened the door. The black dog stood there, its familiar milky eyes staring into my soul. I jumped in surprise at first, but quickly smiled at the thought that the dog came all the way from the woods to my house. "Hey, bud," I said, bending down and petting its frosty skin. "How did you find me?" "It was the lavender, wasn't it?" I joked, referring to the essential oil I always had on my hunting gloves and wrists. I could have been mistaken, but I swore the dog nodded its head slightly. "Where are your friends?" I asked. My brother loves dogs. We could all play a game of ultimate frisbee. The dog blinked up at me in an almost amused manner. It nudged my arm with its cold nose. "Do you want jerky, bud?" I asked. The dog blinked. "All right then, wait here." I walked to the pantry and grabbed a bag of jerky before returning to the dog. I once again snapped a piece of jerky in half and gave the half to the dog. It swallowed it whole like it did the first time and just sort of wandered back into the tree lean that I laughed to myself, and the rest of the day went by normally. I awoke that night with fear in my chest. It felt as if I was being watched. Slowly, I sat up and peeked through the curtains. My breath hitched. A woman stared back at me. She stood in the tree lean, completely naked. She looked Native American, but with milky white skin that almost glowed in the moonlight. Her black hair was in 2 long braids. I felt my world crash around me as I stared into her big, white, milky eyes. Just like the dog's, I realized. The woman caught my gaze through the window and smiled. It sent chills into my heart. She walked to the window, almost as if approaching an old friend, and tapped onto the glass. I don't know why I did, but I opened the window out of pure curiosity. Are you okay, lady?" I asked, trying not to sound fearful. She just nodded and said something in a language that I couldn't pin down. I caught nighttime and forest, so it may have been Cree, but it sounded so ancient. "Do you want me to call the police?" She cocked her head to the side. I take it she couldn't understand the question. She took me by surprise when she took hold of my wrist and put a feather into my hand. Her hands were so cold that I shivered. Then she just turned and ran back into the woods. I awoke the next morning convinced that it was a dream, but I turned to find the feather on my dresser. I haven't seen the dog for a year now, and I have no idea why the woman came to my window. I still have the feather, and I still wear lavender oil. I don't know why the woman and the dog had the same eyes, but after doing some research, I learned about skinwalkers, and I feel that that is what I encountered. But they weren't malevolent in any way, and I never felt threatened, only a bit uneasy and cold. And I don't know if this is related in any way, but I often find little presents on my windowsill like rabbit skin, and my parents are curious why dead owls keep appearing on the porch. 4th story. I think I encountered a skinwalker. I've always been a bit of a skeptic, ever since I was a kid. Scary stories don't faze me. Horror games never frighten me. And whenever I hear something weird at night, I instantly assume it's something normal. An animal, or just the house settling. Despite this, something very unsettling happened to me the other day, and I'm really not sure what to make of it. I think it's the first time in years I've been genuinely frightened. I live in a forested area in the U.S. Me and my girlfriend live in a large cabin, and although there are roads nearby, our nearest neighbors are at least a kilometer away. We also have 2 cats, one of which sleeps in the bedroom with us, whilst the other often goes out at night, and does whatever cats do when they're out of sight. Anyway, I like to stay up late at night and sleep late into the morning, whereas my girlfriend's an early bird. It was about 1 in the morning, and I was watching crappy TV in the living room whilst my girlfriend slept in the bedroom. I was beginning to grow tired when I heard something outside, near the cat flap. For clarity, our cat flap uses an electronic chip, so only our cats can use it. I assumed it was just one of the cats coming into or leaving the house, and I ignored it. Then I heard it again. It sounded like something thudding against the flat. It happened several times at random intervals until I lost my patience and decided to just go and open the door. Clearly the cat was having trouble getting in. I never thought about it at the time, but this was weird because we feed our cats well, and they're very lean rather than chubby. I passed the bedroom and peered in as I walked past to see if my girlfriend heard the noises. She was fast asleep, but the cat that sleeps with us was staring at the window. I called her name. Nothing. She kept staring. I shrugged it off and kept heading towards the kitchen. The back doors are through there, by the way. Anyway, so I reached the back door and saw a dark shape through the translucent flap. I sighed, expecting the cat to be out there, and opened the door. It took me a moment to open the door, and I saw the cat tense up as I opened the door. The door opened fully. I froze. It wasn't my cat. Whatever it was had started moving before I opened up, and I only caught a glimpse of a distorted figure, kind of like a tailless dog bolting, and I mean absolutely pelting it. I freaked out and slammed the door shut. What the hell was it? I wasn't sure. My natural skepticism kicked in, and I assumed it was just my other cat, and I had merely startled it. Perhaps the darkness had made it appear larger. Nevertheless, I was creeped out and decided to go to sleep. As I slipped into bed, I realized something horrifying. The second cat was asleep on the rug. It took a while to get to sleep that night. Everything seemed normal until a few hours later. I awoke to a strange feeling of dread. Something wasn't right. My girlfriend was fast asleep. I held my breath and heard something creaking by the door. It sounded too loud to be one of the cats. It was as if a person was walking about. I reached towards my bedside cabinet and flicked on the lamp. The room was illuminated, and I saw something standing just outside the open door, staring at me. The same twisted figure I had spotted outside earlier. It wasn't very tall, maybe a little over 5 feet, but it was its face that scared me the most. I only caught a glimpse of it, but what I saw will stay with me forever. It looked like a dog, but with an elongated face and almost human-like eyes. You know that weird, distorted snarl hounds pull when they're pissed off. It had that expression. I instantly started yelling profanities as I scrabbled backwards, trying to straighten up. The creature turned and sprinted down the hall. I heard it dash outside and go past the window behind us just above the headboard. I managed to look out as my girlfriend started to panic as she woke up fully. We both caught a glimpse of whatever the hell this thing was as it dashed off into the woods near our home. Grabbing my trusty shotgun from beneath the bed, as well as a couple rounds from the ammunition box that sits next to it, I ran out of the room in my underwear and rounded into the kitchen. The door was open. I'd forgotten to lock it when I saw the thing originally. I haven't seen it since, and we still live in our cabin, but I've bought sturdy locks for all of the main doors and windows in the house, and always check the exit points at night. I also go to bed a bit earlier than I used to, so I'm asleep when the freaks of the night start to wake up. I've read a bunch of forums, and the only thing I can compare it to, based on what I saw, is a skinwalker. If you know anything about these things, please let me know. Fifth story. How to outsmart a skinwalker. If you're reading this, congratulations, I am probably dead or worse. My name is Daniel, and I own quite a bit of land up in the Appalachian Mountains, left to me by my great aunt. So far, in the years I've lived here, paranormal and downright disturbing things have happened to me here. People told me to just leave or report it like I've never done that before. To them, I'm just the young guy that went crazy a little too early. It bothers me that normal people have no idea what goes on up here, all alone. My first encounter with them, I didn't know how to deal with them. Heck, I didn't even know what they were called until recently. It's important, or at least it's important to me, that some of the tricks I've learned throughout the 3 years I've lived up here could be of use to somebody. My second, or maybe third time I was stalked by a skinwalker, it felt like I was walking in circles. I had a trail camera with an SD card pretty deep in the woods. But when I tried to walk back to my cabin, I kept passing the camera. I was effectively walking in circles. This went on for hours. The sun was setting soon, and I was quite thirsty at the time, I remember. I sat up against the tree my camera was mounted on and started softly crying. It was watching me, I guess waiting for me to fall dead. I hit myself in desperation a few times, trying to think. I sat up and took a very deep breath, wiped the water from my eyes, and it dawned on me. It's got to be messing with my equilibrium. I have to be off balance. There's no other way. Teleportation, in hindsight, sounded stupid. But I could still walk, but my depth perception was slightly off. All I had to do was tilt my head as far as it would go into my shoulder and walk back to my cabin. My ear was pressed into my shoulder, but even with one ear, I could still hear how anxious the creature sounded pacing in the woods, hoping I didn't get away. Once I made it inside my cabin, I didn't come out for a couple days for safe measures. Another trick they know is mimicking animals. I found that they like coyotes. I used to coyote hunt quite a bit back home, but never up here in the mountains. I seen on a couple of my deer cameras that it looked like right after I left my camera, a coyote would follow me a while, if not all the way home. I had to stop that real quick, and I set out some snares. All a snare would and could do is jam the coyote's leg into the mechanism until a button is pressed, and the thing would unlock. I set out a couple of them, but also rubbed white ash on all of the traps. And sure enough, the next time I start walking back from my camera, I hear the sound of one go off. I quickly ran back to where I had laid the trap's gun drawn, and all that was left was the trap in 3 separate bent-up pieces and the subtle scent of burning hair in the air. Every time I checked the camera after that, a coyote with a nasty burn scar on its leg would stop where the camera was mounted and turn around and walk back into the brush. And lastly, do not engage in any type of combat with them. Warding them off is one thing, but actively hunting them is a mistake. I wish I would have known that sooner. I had 2 buddies back in town I used to tell my stories to. Alcohol loosens the lips. Their names were James and Cole. I'm pretty sure they were cousins, but I never asked. Thinking about it now, I wish I would have gotten to know them better. Long story short, they're dead and I'm dying. This morning they came and pounded in my door, insisting we hunt these skinwalkers. I told them it was a very bad idea, but they even took the liberty of buying silver bullets. They told me how much they cost, but I can't remember right now. I finally caved, and we prepared all day. We first started making a large amount of white ash, cleaning our guns. Heck, they even packed MREs and special high-dollar spotlights. We set off right as the sun went down. We weren't 3 hours in when disaster struck. We're all sitting around a tree. I could tell these skinwalkers were watching us. They're all around us. Multiple. I'm frantically scanning everything with my spotlight, not even realizing Cole wasn't with us anymore. I asked James where he was, but he didn't seem nervous at all and told me he may have had to pee. I turned back to face my front, and there I see Cole. He's a good distance out, but something wasn't right. He was contorting in ways a human could never. I started to turn around to ask James what we should do, but halfway around, I heard James' guttural-sounding breathing, like his lungs were filling with blood. I couldn't stand to be there anymore and booked it back to the cabin. The forest seemed like it was laughing at me in my desperation to run home. I knocked my flashlight running, and it was slowly getting dimmer and dimmer. I eventually had to ditch it and use some of the flares Cole and James bought. I pulled the top off and struck it against a tree, and the red flame lit up the surrounding forest. There were so many of them. 10, 20, probably more, but as luck would have it, they never attacked me. I could see the cabin and flung the door open and shut it behind me. I ran for the upstairs bedroom and quickly got into the old wooden closet where I am typing this. I don't hear them, but they're outside my house. Unfortunately, I did end up getting clawed or maybe bitten. It's not a terrible wound, but it's bleeding black. If you can send help, please do. I really need it this time. Fifth story. My boyfriend brought a skinwalker to my house. Yenad Dash. Natalie, I swear to God, if you say that word, I'll kick you out of my car and leave you on the side of the road, Haley threatened. Yinald Lushii is what I was trying to say to my friend Haley. In case you don't know what that is, that's the Navajo name for a skinwalker. I just found this out not too long ago, too. Skinwalkers are an interesting Navajo legend. Basically, they're like shapeshifters. I know a lot of people who live out in the secluded countryside that have claimed to see them. I personally never saw one before. Not until my idiot boyfriend brought one to my house. Now, before my boyfriend told me about his skinwalker stalker, I had always teased Haley about them. We would drive through secluded areas at night, just for the thrill of what lies in the darkness. But she wasn't a fan when I brought them up in her car. I'd make comments about them just to freak her out. Haley, what if we saw a deer standing on its hind legs in the field next to us? What if you saw yourself sprinting behind the car in the rearview mirror right now? Despite my teasing, I really did believe in skinwalkers. I've always believed in legends and supernatural beings like that, and it was interesting to learn about, not that I really did that much deep diving into the subject. But what I did learn freaked me out. You would think that would keep me from making jokes about it in prime skinwalker territory, but not all of us have that much common sense. I'm not the only one, though. Like I had mentioned before, I don't believe my jokes are what brought one to my house. You see, my boyfriend lives out in the countryside with lots of open space around him. He's always mentioned how he felt like something was stalking him out there, watching as he moved from his car to the house. He always kind of assumed it was some type of freaky animal. His suspicions were confirmed, but it wasn't exactly what he thought it was. According to him, he saw a skinwalker in the field when he came home from my place one night. Gavin, come on. You didn't see a skinwalker. Nat, I'm telling you, most animals aren't that tall. And their eyes don't glow green. How much sleep did you get? He gave me a disapproving look. His claim was that the night before, when he got home, he saw a tall, looming creature watching him from the tree line with bright green and glowing eyes. Now, like I said, I do believe in skinwalkers, but my boyfriend also doesn't get much sleep, so of course I figured he was hallucinating something watching him. I wasn't hallucinating. There was a skinwalker at my place, and I saw him, and I literally almost pissed my pants. I promise, I wasn't imagining anything. I caved in and told him I believe him, and as long as he didn't conjure one up at my place, that's all that mattered to me. Then we went to bed and never saw any skinwalkers again. That should have been the happy ending of this story, right? Nope. I really didn't think about it the next day. I mean, I live in a pretty busy area. It's not exactly where you would think most skinwalkers reside, but maybe some have a preference for bigger cities. More people to stalk, I guess. Throughout the day, I had been cleaning the house, getting it ready for the week ahead. Since I work close to 40 hours a week, I really don't have much time to clean, so I basically just do it when I can. Time flew by, and at 8:40 p.m. all I had to do was take out the trash. It's around the time of year where night falls pretty early, so I had to take the trash out in the dark. Normally, that wouldn't really bother me, but because of my boyfriend's little tale that I happened to remember at that moment, it freaked me out. Just a little bit, not enough to piss my pants like some other people. When I stepped outside and heard a low growl, maybe that was closer to pissing my pants territory. My neighbors do have a little pit bull that they leave chained up outside, ridiculous, so I just blamed the noise on him. That's the most reasonable explanation, and to keep myself from freaking out, I had to stay reasonable. Then I saw the eyes. Not pit bull eyes. Not any dog's eyes. Nothing even remotely close to a normal animal or even human. And they weren't even green, so at least my boyfriend's SKINWALKER stayed behind. All I could see in the darkness of my neighbor's yard was two glowing red eyes. Maybe this was a good time to piss my pants, and God only knows I was close. I've always heard the term fight or flight, and I figured I would be a flight type of girl. I was right. I threw the bags on the ground and basically flung my body back to the front door, frantically trying to turn the knob to get it to open. I heard twigs break under someone's steps, and that's when I pissed my pants. I guess I am more of a baby than my boyfriend after all. The door slammed loudly behind me, but nothing could mask the growling noise I heard from the other side of the glass. Because it was so dark, I really couldn't make out more than a silhouette, but the silhouette was enough to make me go from pissing myself to shitting myself. The outline looked sort of fuzzy, like it had some type of hair on its body. The worst part were its eyes. Somehow they were even brighter than they were before, a piercing and sinister red. I had already locked the knob. Thank God I formed that habit. But I needed to find my keys to fully lock the door. I didn't want to take my eyes off of whatever was on the other side of that glass, but I knew I had to. It had to be tonight that my keys weren't hanging on the hook where I usually kept them. I'll remember this the next time I toss them on my desk. When I turned back around from grabbing my keys, those glowing red eyes were no longer staring at me. Somehow, that made this entire situation way worse. I needed to see where he was stalking me from. I couldn't really focus on that at the moment. So I hurried towards the door, locked it with my key, and closed the inside door. The windows were all closed and locked, so I knew that he couldn't get inside without me hearing some resistance. It took about 3 hours for me to finally calm down, but until then I kept my eyes open. I barely blinked until the stress from the situation turned into fatigue, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I didn't feel the same presence as I did while I was outside, so maybe that was a good sign, but I really didn't want to fall asleep. I felt vulnerable enough sitting in my bed, a hammer and mace next to me, of course. But I did. I fell asleep, in my piss-soaked pants, might I add, and woke up the next morning alive. I didn't feel alive. I felt like 10 years had been taken off my life. But I was breathing, and I wasn't hurt. Not physically, at least. Oh shit. Gavin. I need to tell Gavin. 10:34 a.m. He was probably asleep, but at that point I really didn't care, so I FaceTimed him. I saw myself in the front view camera. My eyes were bloodshot and puffy, probably from keeping them open for so long. I guess this kind of freaked Gavin out. Nat? What the hell? Did you dash? I know it's rude to interrupt, but I had to cut him off. I'm sure he probably didn't understand most of what I said, considering I was basically racing through the story, but his face at the end of my story told me that he understood enough. And he actually believed me, probably because I looked like I had the life sucked out of me. I haven't felt the presence of that thing since that night, and it's been 2 nights since I saw those red eyes outside my door, but I have a feeling it isn't going to leave me alone forever. I just hope that next time I'll be prepared, even though it's pretty hard to prepare for a SKINWALKER attack. But if I do get attacked, blame my idiot boyfriend, since he basically summoned it to my front door. Maybe I'll get him to kill it for me. 6th story. I think my wife is a SKINWALKER. My wife and I just recently welcomed my sweet daughter into this world, but I got a bad feeling she may not be as sweet as she seems to be to me. But to understand why I'd say that about my own daughter, I need to give a little backstory to the situation. We haven't been married very long, as it's not really frowned upon to marry soon in my family. But when we were first dating and staying with my parents, we slept in their living room, and when we woke up one morning, I noticed the door was still unlocked, but I was always sure to keep it locked. I never really noticed anything else, though. I never saw any handprints on the door or windows. I never saw anything out of the ordinary at all that would be a telltale sign of an intruder. I brought it up to my dad, so he took me to his office to check the CCTV monitor. No one had approached the house all night. In fact, everything was eerily still except for a very large cat that would always hang out in their yard. That cat had been around for a long time, though. We always thought maybe it was a neighbor's cat because we lived out in the back country of Texas and there were other people out in the woods. But growing up there, I did actually notice a lot of things that scared the shit out of me. I once saw my cat, Salem, shape-shifting right in front of my eyes when my little cousin and I were playing soldiers near the woods. One of the old men down the road would tell us stories of a panther that would kill people's horses, but I wondered if it was really my shape-shifting cat or something. My dad also told me a story of a man that lived on our land before we did that killed his daughter's bus driver for what she said he did to her one day when she came home crying. And he would see the ghost of that dad standing over him when he slept with a blood-stained shirt and evil radiating from his eyes. And of course, countless other stories of all sorts of things that go bump in the night. None of that really seemed related to that night. I noticed the door was unlocked. However, since then I've noticed a lot of things are different about her than she used to be. But nothing too extreme, just minor things that only people really close to her would know. Like she started wearing makeup when she never really liked it before. And what she liked to eat changed. But I didn't really know how to explain it. I had only known her a few months and only had to ask what she liked to eat so few times for dates and family gatherings. Every time I tried to talk to her about it or ask her if something was wrong, she shot it down. So I just had to deal with the fact that maybe I was just discovering her for who she really is. I got used to it. It wasn't a big deal after all. Like I said, it wasn't anything major, and she still seemed like the girl I loved. And like I said, we had only been dating for a few months at the time. She Aslo started calling me Delicious, which wasn't really a pet name we had used before. I tried to ignore how uncomfortable her tone was when she used it. It was probably just sexual anyway. More recently, I've noticed odd smells originating from under our house when I'm out working around the yard. I've also noticed a greater number of flies and carrion birds. I was hoping a lost dog or some large rodent had just crawled under there and died. But one day, I found the promise ring I had given her that she said she lost before we even moved to this house. It looked extremely old now and caked with mud. I started nosing under the house near where the ring was laying, and I found a large indentation on the earth, as if something was laying there but had been moved. Soon after that day, she surprised me with the news that we were going to be parents, and I've been so excited at first until I realized something. I just knew my initial suspicions were proven true when she got pregnant. You see, my wife warned me right away not to expect children because of an accident she had when she was small. She was infertile. 7th story. The SKINWALKERs of Wisconsin. It was a weekend. I was out hunting in the northern forests of Wisconsin. I was walking through the woods. It was near dark when I came across a clearing. It couldn't have been more than 50 feet in diameter. Then I saw it. The largest buck I had ever seen. I then laid down on my stomach and pointed my rifle at its heart. The buck must have heard me as it looked in my direction, but it didn't see me, so it went back to grazing in the field. As I pulled the trigger of my rifle, A large branch snapped behind, and I thought I saw a wolf running off beside me, causing me to flinch and miss my shot, hitting the buck in the side of the torso as the buck let out a scream. I know I had hit something important as its side was gushing blood. It still ran, but I knew it would die at some point soon from its wound. I just had to follow the blood as it ran. I followed the blood trail for a few minutes before coming across a much larger clearing, at least 300 feet in diameter, and I saw movement at the other end of the clearing. Thinking it was the buck, I got back onto my stomach and chest and aimed my scope at the movement to see what it was, seeing a wolf eating the buck. I was disappointed the wolf had killed the buck before I could, but I just watched it, in awe by the cruelty yet beauty of nature. But then I saw something. Was that a hand where the wolf's paw should be? No, it couldn't be. It must just be a scratch from the wolf. But did it have human teeth? I shifted a bit in my spot to try and see better, snapping a twig. There's no way the wolf could have heard me, but its head then snapped up to me on the small raised plateau I was on. It looked like it had human eyes, and it looked like it smiled at me. And it then stood up on its hind legs, still looking at me, deer's throat gripped in its long-fingered hand. This scared me so much I dropped my rifle. And in the second it took me to look down and grab my rifle again, the wolf was already halfway across the clearing. There was no way it could have gotten there that fast. As I looked back up at it, it stopped running, still looking at me. What the fuck? I whispered under my breath, terrified. I stayed where I was and stood up with my rifle aimed at it, still looking at the wolf. There was no way it could be a wolf, but the one thing I've learned from my 16 years of hunting and camping: never turn your back on and run from a predator that was hunting you. The wolf then opened its mouth like it was yawning, but it then let out a scream that sounded part human scream, part howl, and part animalistic screech, as it then looked like the wolf frowned at me like it was disappointed in me standing my ground, before walking back to the deer and crouching down before continuing to eat it, as I then turned and ran for at least an hour back to my car. That horrifying scream playing in my head on repeat before I practically dived into my car. It was the happiest I'd ever been to see that old piece of shit in my entire life. As I then drove home, I didn't turn the radio on. I just drove in silence. When I got home, I just cried in my car from fear of what had happened and joy from finally being safe for at least 5 minutes before finally getting out of the car and running into my house, locking every door and window, and pulling every curtain shut. If you ever go hunting in the woods of northern Wisconsin, do not stay if you come across a wolf eating. Those things don't like it when you stare. 8th story. My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours. So I got home at around 11 p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of joints and spark one up as I pull YouTube on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close passing out when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I've been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I remembering waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once it did, I grabbed my phone, checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m. from what I remember. I was starving, and so I got up, began walking towards the fridge. And then I noticed it, a soft but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch. My roommate coming home, the shower turning on. I stood there for a while trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off. I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell? Realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room, but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. "Hey man, you all right?" No response. I considered kicking the door down, but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. "Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. Sent 2 hours ago." I look at the bathroom door, then back down to my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there, go back into the end of the living room, and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone. My roommate's phone. The panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, and so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately I get this feeling that I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. So I'm looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know, its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away. But there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion, that this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed, that the only element of its composition was that of unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it. But the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as bat's hit. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. Soon I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single, muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officers still hadn't come down. Soon I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos. Officers shouting over each other and into their radios. More questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms where I found 2 nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate. Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside of the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall? And one of the most unsettling ones. Have you ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in, shit that I had written off as figments of my imagination, simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time where I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered. But as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late-night drowsiness at the time, and I had never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. A cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. What happened? I asked him. What did you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. I don't know, he said. I really don't know. I nodded. Tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. Ninth story. There's a skinwalker in my neighborhood. I had heard of skinwalkers before, but always just assumed they were the Native American version of werewolves, so I never gave them much thought. Until last week, when one of the co-workers at my new job told me that they were his most feared folklore creatures. He's originally from Utah, so that makes sense. He suggested some YouTube videos to watch on the subject, and after work that night, I binged about 4 or 5 of the videos. I totally understand his stance on them now. I live in rural South Carolina, so to be completely honest, I wasn't too worried about the possibility of running into one. My coworker told me that they're basically a Midwestern thing. I'd be more worried about Wendigos if I were you. He joked the day after I watched the videos. We had a good chat about skinwalkers and Wendigos during our shift and just reveled in the creepiness of them. I mentioned how one of the tales said that the more you talk about skinwalkers, the more they're drawn to you, and he made sarcastic ghost noises to keep the mood light. That night I showed the videos to my fiancée. She was way more creeped out than I was. I became kind of obsessed. I love scary things and couldn't help but watch every video I came across. I discussed skinwalkers with my other horror enthusiast friends, looked up skinwalker art, read true skinwalker stories on Reddit, just dove headfirst into all things skinwalker. This went on for a few days until I started feeling a little burned out on the subject. I live in a fairly nice neighborhood where all the houses are on one side of the street. On the other side is property that used to belong to the local elementary school. The building is on the next street over, so basically it was like the school's backyard or whatever. The school shut down about 30 or 40 years ago, and the county just let nature reclaim the. So directly across from my house is an old chain-link fence and just overgrown woods. 2 nights ago, while I was smoking a cigarette, I heard leaves rustling across the street. I didn't bother looking up from my phone. I live across from woods. It was probably a deer. The rustling stopped, then started again, and it sounded like whatever was over there was running back and forth along the fence line, panting like a dog. This caught my attention. There had been a few rabies cases in my town 2 months back, so a strange dog running around in the middle of the night was definitely something I'd want to keep an eye on. I look up from my phone in the direction of the sounds, and they just stop. It was like the thing knew I noticed it. I strained my eyes trying to see what it was, but it was obscured by the overgrowth. I didn't look away, must have stared at the spot for at least a minute. It didn't make another sound, didn't move again, so I knew it was still there. A chill ran down my spine, and I began thinking of every skinwalker video I had watched over the last week, and I felt sick to my stomach. I quickly put out my cigarette and went inside. The next morning I took my dog out for a short walk. She's a pug zoo named Honey and is like my child. Me and my fiancé taught her that pee-pee popo means it's time to go outside to potty. It's the cutest thing. Anyway, this particular morning, I take her out to the front yard to do her business. She pees and then walks around sniffing for about 5 minutes before walking to the side of the street and sitting down. She's never done this before, so I was a little annoyed. I tugged on her leash lightly and tried to coax her back toward the house. "Come on, honey. Gotta poo-poo." She didn't budge. This dog could be stubborn sometimes, but this was something else. She tugged back against the leash and just stared across the street, sniffing the air occasionally. It was then that I realized she was staring at the exact spot that I heard the thing the night before. I got goosebumps, and I quickly picked her up and began walking back to the house. As I got closer, I noticed something on the ground by my front steps. It was one of the Halloween decorations my fiancé had hung up on our house. Plastic black roses with plastic eyeballs and spiders on them. The stems were wire so they can be wrapped around things to keep them secured. This flower was torn apart. Something had come onto my porch, taken down the flower, and torn it apart, leaving it lying in front of my steps. I picked up the flower and threw it away. I didn't tell my fiancée. I didn't want her freaking out. The rest of that day went by uneventfully. That night I told my coworker about what happened, and he looked a little concerned but brushed it off. So what I heard was most likely just a dog, and the flower was probably knocked down by the wind. I had my doubts. As I was walking to my door after getting home from work last night, I heard that same panting as the night before and the clicking of claws against asphalt. I turned quickly to see a dog that looked like a brown, mangy bull terrier hauling ass down my street. The street is probably about 40 feet away from my front porch, so I couldn't get a great look at it, but I could tell it was only running on 3 legs because one looked mangled. It turned quickly and darted into the tree line across the street through a part of the fence that had been pulled back. The fence wasn't like that earlier that day. That's when I noticed that the dog didn't have a tail. I almost threw up. Skinwalker legends say that when they take the form of an animal, they never have tails. I try to rationalize it to myself. Maybe it just had a stub tail that I missed because it was running. I immediately went inside. My fiancée was sitting on the couch petting Honey. She could see I was upset and asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing, just almost got clipped by a car before I pulled into the driveway. She got up, hugged me, and cursed the person that almost hit me. She asked me if I could take Honey out for pee-pee poo-poo because she had been creeped out by all the spooky videos we've been watching and didn't feel comfortable going outside at night by herself. Honey perked up. She ran to the door and looked between me and the door, whining excitedly. I stared down at her for a moment before agreeing to it. I'll just keep her close to the porch, I thought. We walked off the porch, and she immediately tried to walk to the street. I tugged on the leash, and she tugged back. She eventually moseyed to the edge of the porch and peed. After, she began walking around sniffing. I told her the usual line. "Come on, Honey. Got a poo-poo?" She huffed at me, sniffed around some more, and eventually started pooping. I was on edge the entire time we were outside, but being around her helped calm me down a little. Then I heard it from across the street. "Come on, Honey." My voice in the exact same tone and inflection as I had just said it. It sounded staticky, like an old radio broadcast, but it was definitely my voice. Honey stopped what she was doing and stood alert. She looked over to me and cocked her head. "Come on, Honey. Got a poo-poo?" Again, my voice called from across the street. Honey began whining, looking from me to the woods across the street. I picked her up and began backing up to the steps, not taking my eyes off the part of the fence that had been pulled back. "Honey, come." The voice sounded firm now, like it was getting aggravated. Honey squirmed in my arms, whining. I didn't know if she was trying to get out to go to the voice or to run inside, but I wasn't taking any chances. I turned and bolted up the steps and to the door. As I walked inside, I turned one last time to look across the street. There, standing in the part of the fence that was pulled back, was the dog. Its eyes were glowing a dull orange, and it had its teeth bared. The face was all wrong, like someone had taken a distortion tool and just dragged around random features. Once again, I didn't tell my fiancée. Stupid horror movie cliche shit, I know, but I really don't want her losing her shit. I just told her there's a strange dog running around the neighborhood, so to not take Honey out at night. Later last night, after we had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside my window. Against my better judgment, I rolled over to try and see it. I don't, but the pacing stops. "Come on, Honey," my voice called out, cutting through the quiet of the night. I prayed my fiancée didn't hear. It called out 2 more times before I heard it walking away. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Today, when I get to work, I'm going to ask my coworker what I can do to get rid of this thing. I'm scared. I don't think there's a way. If anyone knows anything, please let me know. 10th story. My grandfather saw a skinwalker. My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard, in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear, and each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide, dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, he began, I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn brush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek and some old abandoned farmsteads. The fire sparked and a log cracked, jolting me out of the story. What next? I asked. Settle down, boy. You'll hear soon enough. Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember, too, when the engine began to sputter and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. God damn it, Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road as it coasted to a halt. Stay here, son, as he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up carrion, like one of them dead, bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too, the back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. Pa, I called. Pa, PA. No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest, boy. I tell you, I never felt fear like this. Not until Vietnam. Not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa door and saw a shadow bound across the road, through both dim beams of light, across the partly open domed hood. Grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco spit off to his side, and he looked pensively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and gasped for air. The night was cool, but I was sweating and clammy. Well, what happened? What about your father? What did you see? He sighed, a creature. He shook his head. You have to understand, there were legends, older than the rock cairns out in the valley, older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old Indian chiefs and their shamans. The Apache and Hapa and Cherokee and all them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories about dark Injun magic, a deal made with the old spirits of blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white men that came for their land and women. They called them. He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and bodied forward into his tale. Across the fire and the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and old mountains, he bodied forward. They called them skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote, but messed up, boy, long and malformed snouts, teeth like a Bowie knife, long arms, and standing 7 foot even hunched over. They'd gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. Wily, too, they could change their voice to match a person you knew or might know. Boy, that's what I saw. Big and fast, only for a second it ran across the road. Gray and mottled, muscle flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy, muscled, hunched shoulders. And it turned, looked right into the cab, looked right into my eyes, and I swear, boy, I swear it grinned at me. I sank into my seat, in shock, in fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens. Charged and full with power. I yelled for my pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaking as grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide. So they could take others. Not for long, the legends say. Maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fists up to fend off attack. "Son, it's me," my father said before climbing into the cab. He grasped the steering wheel and pulled himself in awkwardly, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed all them camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma," as he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out onto the road, and our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? No, boy, I knew, because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with them yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next us, boy. My pa kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. "Son," he said, "don't look at it, don't look at it." That's how I knew, boy. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.